There's the recording.
Finally. Okay, so
Well,
does that make sense?
I like to think of it in terms of how the controller is going to implement this. So you have all these resources floating around, and there's a controller watching all of them, and it's going to see a request to bind a BAR to a B,
BR to B, yeah.
and the BAR is in a namespace, and the BR is not. And so it has to decide, do I allow this or not? And so there needs to be an algorithm sort of starting from that BAR and that B to go find the reference policy to consult, or policies, because the way we specified it last week, you could have more than one that referred to the same bucket in principle. So that the two ways we thought of it was, one, you could start from the bucket, find a bound BR, go to that BR's namespace, and then scan the whole namespace for reference policies referring to that bucket, and then all of them get enforced. That was one algorithm. The other one was the bucket could have a pointer to a namespace on its own, separate from the binding to the BR, such that you don't need a BR. You can just create a bucket with a reference to a namespace, and then you go look in that namespace for reference policies. Either one of those tells you which namespace to go look in for reference policies. And then I think we agreed that there's no reason you can't have two or more reference policies referring to the same bucket.
Right.
And so that is a workable scheme, and it's clear what the user is supposed to do in either of those cases. So I guess pick the one that seems less gross.
Yeah. So okay, so go over the second one again. So you said in the second one, you can have multiple reference policies for the same bucket. Was that the distinction you're making?
No, I mean, in either one, once you know the namespace, there could be a very large number of reference policies in that namespace. And you have to scan all of them for matches to the bucket. And because the bucket is just a parameter of the reference policy and it's not unique in any way, there could be two or more reference policies that refer to the same bucket. And the only rational thing to do from a controller's perspective is to do an either or a union kind of an approach to access. And that applies to either approach, right? As long as there's no one-to-one mapping between reference policies and buckets or anything, you're going to have a situation where there could be two or there could be three. The distinction between the two approaches was one relies on having the bucket be bound to a BR, and then you just go in the name, you go look in the namespace of that BR. The other approach was there is a pointer directly to a namespace in the B, which would allow you to get all of these benefits without ever creating a BR. You could just create a B with a pointer to a namespace, and then go look there for reference policies. The downside to the second approach is, of course, you have an extra field on your bucket, which is a namespace pointer field.
How does that get filled if you rebind a bucket?
Anytime the bucket got bound, you would just set the namespace to whatever the namespace of the BR was. But the benefit would be if you had an unbound one, you could still set it to something.
But you'll need you don't even need admin permission for that, right? You just create a BR that just binds to it.
Well, you needed admin permission to create the B, but yeah, once the B exists, you can just create a BR and a bunch of reference policies. But the only reason to do the second one is if we didn't want to force you to create a BR in the namespace. And as I think about it, I can't think of any strong reason to not do that. It just felt weird to me.
It's just yeah, no, I see what you mean. The thing with this kind of forced always requiring a BR is you might end up with some BRs that don't bind, right? Because there's a race condition. If there are
that would only occur when you were attempting to create BRs for static buckets. Or anytime you create a BR with no bucket, it's understood to be a request for dynamic provisioning, in which case the dynamic provisioning will eventually bind it to a bucket unless there's an error. But yeah, anytime you create a BR that tries to bind to a static bucket, yeah, there's a risk, I guess, that it doesn't bind.
Yeah. So cross cluster, let's say we're going one cluster to another. I also think this approach is, it sounds cleaner. I'm just trying to make sure we think about all the use cases. So cross cluster, that is when we're going from one cluster to another, or let's say one cluster is down, what would be the reason? So all the buckets that were created by Cozy in namespace one, do you just recreate those references? Do you just recreate those YAMLs in the new cluster and then just everything works?
Yeah, I mean, it would feel like a brownfield situation in the second cluster because you're just creating buckets that appear to be static and using them the way you use the brownfield. You need to be careful to set the deletion policy to retain in case there was a BR that got deleted. And you need to be prepared to deal with the fact that someone on the original cluster could delete the bucket out from under you, in which case you're just SOL. But that doesn't seem like, I mean, that's an inevitable problem, right? Anytime you're sharing resources, someone has the right to delete them. And when he does, anyone else who was still trying to use them is going to have problems. That's just, there's nothing you can do about that.
Fair enough. Okay. And I remember one more thing we were trying to decide was how a reference policy API looks, as in what are the fields that's going to be in it. And if I remember correctly, we were trying to decide. So let me pull that up. I was writing an Emacs document. I'm trying to remember where I have it. Okay.
I think that the salient question was, again, like, if we always require there to be a BR in the namespace where the reference policy is, then the reference policy could just refer to the BR by name in the same namespace, or you could have it refer directly to the bucket if you don't want to require there to be a BR. Or you could have it directly refer to the bucket even if you want to require there to be a BR. Doesn't really matter. It's just, we should pick one and say that's what we're going to use to refer to.
Okay, so that's where it gets weird for me. So yeah, I remember this. So the question here is, so the reference policy would refer to the BR, but then really the reference policy is being set on the bucket. Like, that's what you're doing, right?
Yeah, because the person who created the BAR in the other namespace has no idea what your BR is named or what namespace you're in. They just know that there's a bucket and they want access to it.
And you yourself may not know the name of the bucket if you don't have access to cluster scope resources.
No, it would appear in your BR as part of the binding process. The name would be filled
true.
in.
Okay. So is it fair?
But it would be awkward. It would be awkward to know it because it's a dynamically generated thing.
Yeah, you can't know it up front. True. So then how do we do that? How do we implement that? So from a user's perspective, how would they choose what the reference is from and what's the references to?
Well, if we go with the BR approach, then every reference policy can refer to one or more BRs and one or more namespaces. And then the controller that implements the enforcement of these rules just has to compute the union of all the policies anytime it's trying to do a bind.
Okay, so let me share my screen. I'm just trying to understand how that would look. So this is the reference policy we've been kind of looking at so far. So do we say from some, let's say bucket was created in Bob's namespace, BR was created in Bob's namespace. So do we say if you want to give access to Alice's namespace, we just say group, core v1 and kind namespace, or kind bucket request and namespace Alice. And two would be not to the bucket, but to the BR, correct?
I can't remember, to be honest. Like, do you have that Emacs doc that you were working on? Because we had, I mean, which one is the from and which one is the to is kind of debatable. Like, does the namespace have access to the bucket, or does the bucket give access to the namespace? Like, the from and the to are strange. But one of them should be a signifier of namespaces, and the other one should be a signifier of buckets, whether it refers to the bucket request or the bucket directly, and whether the namespace just refers to a list of namespaces or whether it refers to BARs in namespace X.
Siddharth and Ben, as far as I remember, so from was namespace, like I am based on the last week's discussion. From was a namespace, and two, initially Sid point to be bucket, but then point, even I don't remember why we changed to bucket request. There was some reason. Like there was no link from.
The benefit to changing it to bucket request is it lets you choose the name. So if you're doing configuration as code, you can create your bucket request with the name of your own choosing and create your reference policy that refers to the bucket request whose name you chose. And then the only challenge is, of course, getting that BR bound to the right bucket. But I guess if an admin created the bucket, then he also controls the name of the bucket. I don't know. It's just an ergonomics thing. It doesn't really affect what you can and can't do.
Well, it does, right? I mean, like you said, configuration as code. You wouldn't be able to upfront create a reference policy until you know the name of the bucket, and that's not okay, I think.
Well, but again, in the static world, you do get to choose the name of the bucket. It's just that
in the dynamic case, you don't.
Right, in the dynamic case, you don't. But in the dynamic case, well, let me think how this would work. How would you want to do a dynamic like provision bucket and then share it? You just create an ordinary BR, let it bind, and then say I'm going to share that with Alice by creating a reference policy.
Yeah, something like that. Or the configuration is basically create a bucket that's accessible from two namespaces.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
Okay, so then we should lean towards using the BR here, and that also implies that we need a BR to exist for this whole scheme to work. So then the scheme of the bucket referring directly to a namespace doesn't make any sense because we can just say, look, there has to be a BR.
Or a bucket request from namespace Alice referring to a bucket. What if we actually and then name of the resource, maybe,
I was going to say that the two would be the BR and the from would be the BAR in the namespace.
Yeah. Oh, so hold on. So we're saying the BAR will directly refer to the BR in the other namespace, not the bucket.
No, that's the weird thing is that the BAR is going to refer to the bucket, but we are not.
I see. Okay, so what if we did it like this? What if we did it like this, where reference policy actually just points to a bucket, but we drive it through the BR? As in the BR gets a field to allowed namespaces or something. That eventually becomes the reference policy internally.
The BR has allowed namespaces?
Yeah.
But then you don't need this object if you want to put all the policy on the BR.
No. The problem with allowed namespaces was we just couldn't. I'm trying to fully remember it, but it just wasn't an approach that kind of fit into the whole Kubernetes ecosystem.
Well, I mean, it was a security mechanism and it was an ugly one because only the admin could change it. One of the advantages to this is that you're entitled to change your own policy and control
Yeah,
what you can do.
but while breaking the semantics of the reference policy, because we're not referring, if I said bucket request here, right? Nobody's going to refer to this bucket request, are they?
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
maybe you
I
can make
guess
it work
okay.
that way.
It could work that way. Fair enough.
Sorry, like I want to interrupt a bit. It's like the from part, like why need to be bucket access request? So for each bucket access request, I need to put up a reference policy, right?
No.
So
There's no name field here. It's just saying from bucket
okay,
access requests in that namespace, they're going to get access, but it's all the bucket access requests in that
uh,
namespace.
okay. The kind was a bit confusing. I thought it would be the kind will be the name of that object which you are.
Yeah,
controlling.
yeah. Yeah, same question. So again, he's asking the same thing that I was, which is the reference policy is supposed to mean the reference from bucket access request in namespace Alice to a bucket in namespace created by namespace Bob, except we're pointing it to a bucket request in namespace Bob, and that's just not intuitive. Like it just, I mean, we can define it to be this way, but I think you know what I mean, right? You're not the reference policy is not a direct reference. It's kind of an indirect reference where you're really pointing from the reference policy is pointing from BAR to BR in a different namespace when it should be pointing from BAR to B.
But the other option is we could say that BARs and other namespaces don't refer to the B, they refer to the BR also. No one refers to the B. That would be the other option here.
Interesting. That might work.
The question is, how weird is it for Alice to know the name of the object in Bob's namespace, given that she can't see his namespace?
And there is another issue here. What if I feel like there's a race condition here, right? Because if you were to do that, what if I create the BAR in Alice's namespace before Bob creates the bucket, and someone in Bob's namespace other than Bob goes and creates a fake bucket with fake data to mislead Alice? Is that a problem?
Well, we did talk briefly last week about what is the behavior when the bind fails. So if the controller responsible for binding BARs sees a new BAR and it goes and consults the rules and says, yeah, there's a real bucket here, but you don't have access, so bind fails, will it retry 30 seconds later, to see if the rules have changed and it's now
No,
allowed
no,
to
I'm
bind,
saying,
or
no,
will it give up forever?
No, I'm saying it'll succeed. It's just because I anticipated the BR name to be something else. It's possible that another user in the same namespace can take up that slot. It's a kind of binding if you think about it. From the reference policy makes from Alice's namespace to BR and Bob's namespace. I mean, the expectation is by directly referring to the BR, the expectation is I'm expecting a BR by this name to exist there, or I'm just going to wait until that BR shows up. And
Yeah, but I mean, we're binding by name. So if someone else creates a different thing with the same name, then it's working as defined. It's working as expected, right? You should never use a name that you don't have control over. If Alice chooses a name to bind her BAR to that Bob doesn't really control, then that's her fault for using that name, or that's their joint fault for agreeing on a name that they didn't control.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a possibility. If there are a lot of users on that one namespace, they might end up creating a bucket.
But I mean, that's users don't really share namespaces, or if they do, like they have to cooperate, and it's just understood that if you don't cooperate, bad things happen.
Um,
Right? I mean, like if you and I are sharing a namespace and you create a pod and I delete it, you're not going to be happy. But like, what else what else did you expect?
so, generally, just looking at how enterprises use Kubernetes, if developers do get access to it, they all get access to a single namespace. And these things, you'd be surprised, I guess. That's what I want to say with how badly some users can screw things up.
But I mean, how can that be our problem? Like this is what the
Fair
RBAC
enough.
system is for, right? The RBAC system is to put rules around what people are allowed to do. And if users decide to just give everyone the power to delete each other's stuff, then the system will allow you to delete everyone else's stuff, and the system is just doing what you told it to do.
Fair enough. It's not something we can architect or solve. Okay, fair enough. All right, so let's finalize on this design then, of this API. So did we say this is going to continue being a list?
I mean, I don't see any downside to allowing it to be a list, because nothing prevents you from having multiple policies refer to the same bucket. So if one
Okay,
policy
so
can refer to multiple buckets and multiple namespaces, like at the end of the day, the controller is going to have to consider every reference policy in the namespace, and sift through them to find all of the matches. And so it's going to need an in-memory cache or an in-memory map of all of the reference policies and all the bucket names and and everything, so they can
a
quickly look this
union.
stuff up.
Yeah, union of all of it. So okay, so that's fine. So multiple buckets too.
Why not? I mean, it gives people more flexibility to have one policy that has a lot of information in it. So
Okay.
I mean, if I have 10 buckets I want to share with 10 namespaces, it's nice to be able to do that in one policy rather than needing 100 policies where I have to have, every bucket and every namespace is a separate policy. Right.
So if an admin wanted one reference policy per namespace, so how would that work? So let's say I have, I want to allow Alice's namespace to access only Bob's bucket, and I want to allow Foo's namespace to only access Bar's bucket. So I'd have
then
to
you
create
need two policies then.
Fair enough. Okay. But if you wanted to do this, okay, fair enough. This would work. Yeah. Just go with this design. Yeah,
but this then raises the question of, do we need to change BARs to point directly to BRs, or so of course BARs can always point to BRs in the local namespace, right? That was the original case for BARs. The question is, if you want to create a BAR to a bucket from someone else's namespace, do you point to the bucket or do you point to the BAR or the BR in the other namespace?
I mean, going down the route we're going, it has to be the BR. And then we get
it doesn't have to, but it's a lot more, it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, that's yeah, it does. I like that approach better than having the reference directly to the B. I'm just trying to think if there are any other issues that we're missing going down this route. Because we've maintained this stance of the BAR should be able to point to both BR and the B. And now we're saying no more reference to the B directly.
Yeah, now we're saying it's always a BR, but it doesn't have to be in the same namespace.
Right.
So the namespace is optional.
Right now, when it's like this, everything is user driven, right? That's what we've gotten to. We're pretty much in full self-service mode.
Well, except for the
Reference policy.
brownfield case. No, the original creation of the static bucket is still an admin task.
Can that also be automated with the BR?
Probably not.
And I mean like a BR that points that already has the bucket name filled in it.
No, I mean, if someone has created the static B, the user can create the BR that points to the B and allows it to bind.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't. That doesn't help you create the B in the first place. You still need an admin to do that. And if you want to have a self-service way of importing brownfield buckets, like we need a whole other object to do that.
Okay. So, I mean, I don't think we need a whole other object, but I don't think that conversation we should have right now. Self-service. Let's figure out this. I mean, let's agree that this is the final cross namespace resource sharing approach, and then we can go there.
Well, the one other unresolved question, or I forget the answer, was what do we do in case of errors? Like do we retry forever? And then, or is it a one-shot behavior? Because I thought what we were talking about last week is like, it's actually very hard to do one-shot behaviors in Kubernetes.
Yeah.
Because any attempt to do that opens you up to failures due to random errors. And that's really unfriendly. So if you want to be resilient to errors, you kind of have to retry forever, even if that means like continually attempting to bind a BAR that's never going to succeed because the policy says it shouldn't. So like we should probably just write that down, that, you know, an attempt to bind a BAR to a BR that is denied by the policy will get retried until either the BAR gets deleted or it succeeds, or the bind succeeds.
Yeah. Yeah. Until
Those are the only two terminal conditions. Are either the BAR gets deleted or it gets bound.
and it just keeps retrying until either of those become true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty straightforward. That's how we do everything else in Kubernetes. That's what I mean. Straightforward. Yeah. Now, do we want to define levels of access? Like, do we want to say something like, from Alice's namespace, get they can only get read-only access to the bucket?
Well, the bucket access classes are how we express that. So you would have to work bucket access classes into your policy. But that makes it a lot more complicated, I think.
So BARs refer to bucket access classes. So if an admin wanted to control, yeah, that does make it complicated.
I mean, you could have two BACs, the read-only one and the read-write one.
But what if you can't say someone from this namespace can only use one of the two, because they might need read-write for a different bucket.
Right. I mean, if you wanted to really be able to say, I want to share Bob wants to share this bucket with Alice, but only read-only. But Alice still needs the ability to have read-write buckets for other purposes, then you would have to encode the BAC directly into this reference policy somehow. And that just makes the reference policy that much more complicated.
No, I don't think we should go down this road. I think we should just let it be.
Yeah, well, we'll wait for someone to scream and then solve it then.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel sufficiently confident with the approach so far. It seems to fit in to and solve many of the problems we've been facing so far. It seems to ease up the complexity of self-service. It seems like it's easier to solve the problems that we were facing earlier, which tells me when generally something like this happens, it's because we found a clean abstraction. And I think that's what we've got here.
Okay.
All right. So go ahead.
Well, I'll feel especially good about it when the network gateway stuff also uses the same mechanism and people like it, because then we'll be sharing the new design.
Fair enough. So let's quickly go over how they do it. They can refer to or they can create routes that point to a service. As in, they create a HTTP route that says forward this to a service somewhere else. How's that different from ours?
I don't know what these HTTP routes are, to be honest.
Okay, so think of it as there's a central team that manages routing across namespaces. So or across different properties or different suborgs in your company. So you create a HTTP route. Let's say you have a global load balancer for your company, and you say, if let's say you're yahoo.com, and because I just know yahoo.com a little better, like kind of. So if it's Yahoo Sports, you go to yahoo.com/sports. If it's Yahoo Movies, you go to yahoo.com/movies, so on. The namespace for sports or the namespace for movies isn't going to manage these global routes. This global routing has to be done from a centralized team, and HTTP route stands for that. The HTTP route defines that for this global route /bar is forwarded to the namespace bar, and the name of the service is also bar.
Okay, so you're saying if I'm in namespace bar, all I do is create the service and I'm done.
Yeah.
And then this is going to front end my service out to the world. And it's global. Look, but these things are namespaced, aren't they? Like the HTTP route is in the namespace foo.
Yeah.
What is the purpose of namespace foo in this world?
Namespace foo is like a centralized platform namespace.
Okay, so that's the special namespace where all the policies live.
Yeah.
And there's no services there. It's just
maybe
that global team that you referred to owns that namespace, and they create all these routes.
Right.
So I have I have one doubt in this. So whether this means all the routes in the HTTP, all the HTTP route in the namespace foo can get it will point to that service, or like service on the bar will redirect to that thing. All the say I have one HTTP foo, then one ABC, something like that. So all the route will be mapped or something like that. That will happen, or it will be only the name with foo.
Sorry, what was so your question is
yeah, like the name and namespace have the same name that have
so that's why you're confused. Okay, so yeah, here the name is unique. Think of it that way. Yeah, the namespace is what we're referring to. So anyone from namespace foo can refer to any service in namespace bar. The one difference, so that's what this, before I go into the difference, that's what it means. So any HTTP route from namespace foo, so it can be another HTTP route from namespace foo. It can be like XYZ or HTTP route 2.
Okay.
Now,
which can be pointed to that service, like which can be redirected to the service. I mean.
Right.
Okay. So in this example, the reference policy is owned by the same namespace that has the service, and they're basically allowing the foo route to refer to their service.
Right.
If they decided they didn't want to allow the foo namespace to apply to their service, they could delete this reference policy and then expose their service some other way.
Yeah. So it's like the I look at it as like push versus pull kind of API. In this case, in case of HTTP route, it's like push. It's like you're saying these people are allowed to push data into my service. In the other case, it's like a pull API. It's like saying these people are allowed to pull data from my bucket. So does the reference policy reside in the originating namespace or the referring namespace? Shouldn't
But
matter.
we don't have enough detail here to know what happens to the HTTP route when the reference policy denies what it wants to do, right? Because all we see here is the metadata and the spec, which presumably someone just created before anything else existed.
It's
then-
just like any of the Kubernetes resources. Like what happens if a PVC doesn't bind? It just goes into a status that says failed. I mean, it's
Right,
reasonable
right.
to expect that. Yeah.
But like if they have the same question about when does the access check occur? Is it just at creation time, and then after that you can delete the policy and access remains? Or like after the HTTP route is created and bound to my service, can I then delete the reference policy and thereby revoke access? Or does
Yeah,
that
that
not
should be
work?
possible.
Like,
Yeah, that should be possible. But
because
actually,
what
no.
we've talked about with buckets
Yeah.
is we're only going to consult this at the time you try to bind the BAR. Once the BAR is bound, the reference policy stops mattering.
Yeah, I remember that. We said that that matters because we wanted to. Yeah, we said that that would be okay because we said we can, if you really wanted to take access away, we could go and delete the BR or something, right?
You didn't want to delete the BAR, because what will happen is the moment that BAR is allowed to bind and the sidecar goes down to the driver and says, mint me a credential, and then they go plumb that credential into some pod somewhere. At that point, the user in the other namespace has the credential, and it doesn't matter what you do, unless you delete the actual credential, they are going to continue to have access. So to do that, you have to just delete the BAR, which will again cause the sidecar to then revoke that credential's access.
Right.
So yeah, we really only can do anything at bind time.
Yeah, that's different from HTTP route, right? I'm just thinking it through. In our case, that makes sense and that should be fine. In terms of HTTP route, if I wanted to change the route, say I wanted to stop having bar point to or slash bar point to bar service, instead I wanted to have slash bar point to XYZ service, then I'd want to do that dynamically, right?
Well, no, but the change to the service has to happen in foo's namespace, not bar's namespace. Right?
Or let's say bar points to a different namespace.
Hold on. I'm reading this one more time, because every time I read this, I find something new. Forward to backend name bar namespace bar.
Mhm.
So the HTTP route is actually pointing to the reference policy by name. In this world, the name of the reference policy matters.
No. So it's pointing to a service. This is bad because they haven't put the group and kind and all that, but it's actually pointing to this is like a backend service. It's pointing to a service by the name bar in namespace bar.
So there's also a service named bar and a
Yeah.
reference policy named bar.
Mhm.
Okay, yeah, that is bad, because that's super confusing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I guess presumably, like, the form that an HTTP route takes is there's some daemon running that has an HTTP listener, and it's parsing URLs and then opening up HTTP client sockets to other HTTP services and acting as an HTTP proxy, presumably.
Yeah.
And the thing is, once that thing is told what to do, it's going to continue to try to forward requests that have slash bar in their URL to the place that it thought they were supposed to go. And even if you take the reference policy away, like, it's not going to stop sending them there. Like the guy on the bar, the guy in the bar namespace might not be listening anymore. He might have taken the service away. But I don't see how it could stop from sending them there. Because once the daemon in the foo namespace knows where to send the requests, you can't revoke that knowledge.
I mean, it's not about the revoking the knowledge, it's more about changing the configuration.
Yeah, but then the question is there some controller that watches for changes to all reference policies and then goes and modifies things in other namespaces as a result of that? Because that's just a really weird way to write a controller, right?
Yeah.
So it's just that a guy in bar can mutate a reference policy and then foo's HTTP route behaves differently as a result. It's like, what controller is making that happen? That they would, that you could write a controller that did that, but then that would be a pretty bizarre controller because it would basically be operating across all namespaces at all times. I don't know. I mean, it's an alpha API they have, so maybe they have some rough edges to smooth out.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. The other fundamental difference is between this reference policy and what we do. So one is what we just talked about, that is during runtime versus during bind time. We're more in the during bind time, and these guys might need to be in the runtime, where the reference is checked constantly, which is weird, but that's one difference that we're seeing. The other is the reference policy they have here allows to be any to be any service in a particular namespace, or in the namespace of the reference policy. In our case, the from is the more generic one. In our case, it's from bucket access request in namespace Alice. So any bucket access request can point to a bucket request in namespace Bob. No, the name of the bucket request is, let's say, Bob BR1. Yeah.
Maybe you should give the policy a different name for clarity's sake. Bob policy. Yeah. Bob RP. I like that.
Yeah.
Now, as of last week, we were calling it a BRP, not an RP.
Bucket reference policy. Yep.
Do you want to stick with that?
So the reason we did that was because we just, you just asked the question of how will a controller take care of it if a reference policy changes, and we realized that we need the reference policy semantics differ between different implementations, and so we, instead of calling it a reference policy, we thought we'd call it a bucket reference policy, just to make sure that we don't start stepping on top of the gateway API guys.
Well, but the important consideration here is that this whole strategy is only a win if we end up using reference policy directly and not having a bucket reference policy. That's
Exactly.
the only,
Yeah.
so we just got to be careful. Like, if we're going to end up with a BRP at the end of the day, then like we should dramatically simplify the design and not have groups and kinds. Just have from be a list of namespaces and to be a list of names, and then the bucket access request and bucket request will be implicit if it's a bucket reference policy. But if we're gonna reuse their object, then yeah, we have to fill out these other fields, and we have to describe what happens if you put garbage in here, because given that they're lists, you could have a mixture of BARs and other stuff in the from list and a mixture of BRs and other stuff in the to list, and we have to specify that we ignore anything that's not a BAR in the from list and not a BR in the to list, or something.
I mean, if it was bucket reference policy, if it was just reference policy, it's just free for all.
Right. And that way it would be good if we had an object that other people were using and it worked out well. I'm nervous that somehow the object will be slightly different, just enough that like we won't be able to share.
I think name and I think name and UUID should be allowed here. Yeah.
Why do we need a name? Like I can understand from the two part, but for from, do we need the name?
Yeah, it's like saying, it's
But
like
you don't
saying,
you don't need it, but it lets you be more specific.
Mhm.
Like
So,
you can leave it blank and then all of them in the namespace will get access. But if you put the name in there, then only the one with that name will have
Name
access.
only. Okay.
And similar,
But
I like the UUID idea because then if you have an object with a specific name and it gets a UUID, you can grant access to that one. And then if they delete that object and create a new one with the same name, it won't have access because you granted access by UUID. I guess you just need to be clear that if you omit these fields, it's like a wild card.
yeah, documentation. Um, so, so the reason I did that is to allow the kind of semantics that they have here. Um, I can see this becoming a thing where they say any service or some service from well, actually, to allow this to happen and our thing to happen. In our thing, we need to specify the name precisely. That is, in case of buckets, it's the to field that specifically refers to a resource. In case of gateway API, it's the from field that specifically chooses um, a resource. Um, in this case, anything from namespace, any HTTP route from namespace foo can point to a service. It's just if you're doing the generic reference policy, I can anticipate use cases where the from field specifically points to a particular resource, and that's where I'm coming from. Adding this name here and
Yeah.
UUID.
The other thing that,
okay.
as we think about this and as we think about sharing the object, I'm starting to worry that someone's going to wonder about the kind of access at some point, because depending on how generic this object is, it could be used for all kinds of weird things. And we mean a specific thing by, you know, reference policy in our context. But like if reference policies get end up getting used for some other purpose that accidentally overlaps with our purpose, and you don't have a kind of access specified anywhere, like our controller could just see those reference policies and say, oh, I guess I better give access to these buckets to this person. Like if we treat any blank field as a wild card and someone creates a reference policy that says everything in namespace Alice has access to everything in my namespace, and the person who created that policy wasn't thinking about cozy because they were thinking about some entirely different use case involving reference policies, and then we ship our controller that goes and sees that reference policy and says, oh, I guess I better give Alice access to all of Bob's buckets. That would be strange, right? Because nowhere did they say what the type of access that they were trying to grant was in the reference policy. They just created a reference policy that specified a bunch of stuff in Alice's namespace and a bunch of stuff in Bob's namespace.
I can
And we
think of different ways we could solve that, but none of them seem like the clean. Um, like for instance, you could have like a downstream reference limiter or something. It's just saying if you refer to this bucket, you can only refer to these bucket access classes. Or if you refer to this BR from your BAR, you can only refer to these BACs. That's kind of what you meant, right?
no, what my concern is that, if the resource policy object does end up getting, or the reference policy does end up getting shared, and someone else has a use case that is more generic than ours, that you could accidentally write a reference policy aimed at that other use case that our controller ends up interpreting as orders to share all of the buckets when that's not what the user wanted, because it's just a list of objects on the from side and a list of objects on the to side, and nowhere in the policy are we saying this is for cozy, right?
We are right
Because-
to the group and kind.
Well, but what if you can leave those empty?
Oh, that shouldn't be allowed.
Well,
Fair
I don't
enough.
know.
Fair
I
enough.
mean,
fair enough.
what if someone wants a reference policy that does refer to all of the objects, and they create
Does yeah, does this one allow it? Does RBAC allow that?
this is a brand new object. We don't. We can
No,
implement
I'm
however
not,
you
I'm not
want.
saying we're constrained by it. I'm more coming from the idea of, is that okay? I mean, like, okay, fair enough. It's a brand new object. We can go down that road. So
Yeah.
you're saying there might be a good reason to allow wildcard everything really.
Yes.
What
Yes.
should be specified then? Like there should be something, right?
Well, that's what I was saying. Maybe you need a third field in addition to from and to, which is the kind of reference that is you're trying to grant.
Don't we
and
have
maybe-
that? Like you mean like some other metadata about the reference, not just kind itself.
Right. So for like the HTTP policy, the HTTP route, the kind of reference access they're attempting to grant through that policy is the access to the HTTP route or the service or whatever. Which, and so they could have a field that just says
Oh.
that, and then we could have a field that says that the reference policy is granting cozy bucket access. It could be like an enum type for what kind of reference policy is this. So the machinery of the
Okay.
reference policy might be in common, but the what is this reference policy trying to express could be an explicit field. I don't know. I'm not saying we need it. I'm just saying that
No, I like
depending
it.
on how this gets shared in the future, that could be a concern.
Yeah, reference type.
Reference type, yes.
And we could have a field rather than an enum. Because
You know what I mean? There would be some magic value that would be recognized by our controller, and we would ignore ones that didn't have that value. That way, in case someone did have a use case that involved wildcarding everything, we wouldn't just pick up that reference policy and try to interpret it. They would have to say that this reference policy is for the purpose of cozy bucket sharing. So
yeah.
I don't know, minor concern.
No, this is fair. Interesting. So something like that, because if it's a HTTP route reference, you might say in properties or something. I don't know. Like we could.
I don't want to make it like super complicated. I would just want.
No, I'm just trying to make sure there is a path forward if this does come up, because I can see it coming up even for buckets. Like we want to define what kind of access is allowed in this case, and reference type could then have some properties encoded in it that say they could be typed. Right now, let's just go with the string map, but you could have properties and encoded in it that say the kind of reference that's allowed here is read only or something like that.
Hey, sorry, I think we're on top of the hour.
We're at time. I don't have a strong opinion about that.
I will stop the recording. So I do want to ask you something, Sid. So about the PR, the CAP review. So you said you pinned the team, right? And then whatever that is in the CAP right now, that's up to date.
Yeah, it's up to date.
Okay. I think some of the diagrams we want to take a look. I think seems to be outdated. I see we still have the bucket access request there. So is that removed, right?
No, bucket access request is still there. It should be there.
It should still be there. I thought that's.
Yeah. Bucket access.
The bucket access got removed.
Oh, okay. But the description looks a little off because the diagram says create bucket access request, but under that it says creates
BA bucket access.
It says a bucket claim. It's a user creates a bucket claim. So it's kind of off. Okay. I mean, I just show you this quickly. I was just checking this.
It might just be outdated. I can take a look and fix it.
Okay. Yeah. I was just okay.
No, it's good to know.
So okay. Yeah. So I will. Yeah. I'll drop now.
Yeah, could you also ping Tim if you get a chance? I'm doing it anyways, just so that we get another person asking him. Before KubeCon, I want to get this merging, if it's possible. I mean, it is possible. Just have to. get him
Okay,
to-
I can try to ping him.
please. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.